Okay. So welcome everybody, and for those of you who wish to make an emergency exit, down that way are the stairs, and I think downstairs are down that way too.
Yep.
The end of each of the hallways. So additions, deletions, or changes in the order of the agenda items. And I've had a request for a change.
We'd like to offer to move item 8, LVR's edit to educational facility to after announcements. Lisa Kingsbury from UVM is here, and it's hopefully a very, very, very brief item. So just let her go home after that, or stay home, but not be on the computer.
Any other changes at all? No.
Nope.
So open to the public for items not related to the agenda. Ryan.
Should I speak from here?
Yeah,
And you hear me online with the microphone?
It's in the ceiling.
Fancy one.
It's over there.
Oh, it is?
Oh,
Yeah, so I'll start by saying, this is my 4th city meeting this week, and it's days. This room is not a great room to have meetings in for people who are attending online, or if the meeting is being recorded. It really does not pick up people's voices very well. It's very unclear. The acoustics area are much better downstairs, but that's my take as a citizen who goes and attends too many meetings. About this meeting in particular, one of the things that was kind of disappointing at the last meeting is I don't feel like there's really a lot of focus on what a downtown is in this form-based code work. I'm not hearing it. I'm not seeing that resolve or come out in different ways. Looking at the agenda, it kind of follows that same sense of where there's more traffic, there is more priority to put people, and that's very counterintuitive. If you look at St. Albans City, Newport, Brandon, even downtown Burlington, we're looking at much lower vehicular traffic counts and much more agglomeration. And so I'm going to again ask that people look at Walkable Nation by Jeff Speck. Chapter 10 is very short. It's like less than 12 pages long. It really talks about what walkability means and how to prioritize it, and that what he calls sea-level streets, like Dorset Street, which is a road, and Wilson Road, which is a strode, are not places you invest in. That's not where people congregate. That's not where agglomeration happens. You can have a good downtown with a bad road going through it as long as you can cross that road. If you can cross it, it's not a barrier if you have good crossings. But when I see the map on tonight's agenda and I see things centering on a Wilson Road at Dorset Street, that says this is going to be our future downtown. And nothing about practical experience says that that could be a downtown. Is it Market Street that our downtown is? Will it be the U Mall? Is that where our downtown will be? Will it be San Remo Drive? Or will it be those places that are just all off of those terribly busy roads that have linkages? Will that be our downtown? And I'm still not seeing anything that tells me that we're going in the right direction towards creating a downtown with the changes we're making. I'm not saying it's not important to make changes in lieu of the feedback that we've had from whatever this group we had architecture, but I really think aren't going far enough in addressing that. And I might add some more comments later on to that. But when I ask you what is the best building in our city, I'm going to tell you that my opinion is Trader Joe's. It does not have a functional second story, but it does not face Dorset Street. Right? Its tractor trailer comes in from Dorset Street. The road is not a street. The road that services the heaviest traffic and commercial traffic, but it faces Garden Street. It has an entrance on Dorset Street
for walkers,
which is sometimes locked. And it has an entrance that faces the other side, east along Garden Street in the parking lot that most people use, even if they're walking off of Dorset Street. Right, that is really effective. And a very distant second is Barnes and Nobles, also doesn't face Dorset Street. Now, it's important to have design elements that acknowledge the road and that people might be there, but trying to face people to it is hostile. No one wants to actually walk on Dorset Street or Williston Road. That is if I have to, not I want to. And it will never be an I want to. We will never reduce traffic that much in my lifetime. All of us will be dead, maybe except for Colin, before any of those places have enough bus rapid transit to make traffic not a disaster. And so I really want you to think hard about what creates downtown agglomeration, people-centric activity, and what is just catering to the appearance of pleasantness as people are driving by. And those are two distinctly different things, very small overlap in that diagram. So please think about that as you're going through the meeting tonight. Thank you.
So, announcements and staff report?
Nope.
Nope.
Couple of things. You probably noticed that the city launched a new website earlier this year. We've been working on the planning and zoning page. So as of this week, we have a completely updated interactive map viewer that incorporates various layers from the city plan, all the new zoning, other analysis tools, water and sewer layers, and it's been simplified. There used to be 3 tabs. It's in a singular tab. So it's a lot more user-friendly. It's right off the planning and zoning page. We've also, under the projects page, all major city projects, instead of being organized by department, which is, good if you knew which department was leading it, is now just under a singular area of projects and initiatives. Within there, we now have a page for LDR amendments more broadly, but then a specific page for each of the LDR amendment sort of projects that you're doing. So the form-based code is one, and you're building out information in that one. The heights that you just approved a charge for last meeting has one. It'll have a little less information because it's just getting started, but we're trying to both make the materials accessible, but the words on that page be much more user-friendly, so you're not diving immediately into zoning language. So for example, for the form-based code, what's on the page is a little description, and then the table that talks about the motivations. Here's the different categories of changes, and here's why they're being advanced. And then if you want to read the actual materials, they're in there as well. So that update, and then of course you all know that last week the city budget passed. So thank you to all the residents and for continued support of the good work of the community. So those are my 2 updates.
Thank you, Paul. So we want to move item 8 up to now, and Lisa is online, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I only had one question, which was that whether the proposed new language has the same legal effect as the prior version.
So the only change that was made to 701D4 in November was to add that underlined sentence. And the only intention of adding the underlined sentence is to make clear that it's post-secondary facilities, not an elementary school or a middle school or something like that. So after UVM expressed concern with that on the day of the public hearing for the previous round of amendments, at that point didn't take their recommendation, and then after looking at it again, decided that the same could be achieved.
Specifically, it was the last city council public hearing, meaning that they would have had to warn an entire new hearing. It wasn't that they disagreed philosophically, it was just that it was the last day.
So UVM's concern was that
added sentence. So to they asked to take the sentence out. At the time, it was, as Paul said, the last day or it was the public hearing, the public hearing at city council. So looking at it again, that we're comfortable with taking out that sentence and adding the phrase post-secondary into the rest of the language, and it has that does the same thing that we intended in the fall.
has the same impact.
No, that's right. Oh, so
Um,
go down, scroll down.
I really do
There.
need to be reminded about why this only applies to post-secondary. It seems like any school could require some type of accessory.
So there's a whole list. So what this connects to is there's a whole list in the table of uses of uses that are connected to or could be connected to a higher education institution, but aren't automatically. So for example, inside the Davis Center are food service providers.
So this,
So a food service provider that serves specifically serving the education in support of an education is allowed, but that's not the same thing as the zoning district authorizing a restaurant to just open that has nothing related to a college. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
well, it does, but so this is all out of context, that's why I didn't quite, it's like, oh, this is. It doesn't say anywhere that this only applied to university buildings,
So that's what the sentence,
post-secondary
the
buildings.
sentence that was added in the fall is what clarified that it was only post-secondary.
Well, I know, but why? I mean, I could see, K through 12 requiring some type of
You mean
Some type of
on
similar
UVM's, on UVM's?
no,
land?
so this
This
is,
is only applicable to the
So-
zone, AI,
IA,
Institutional agricultural.
so it's really
Okay.
only UVM.
okay, so that whole thing only applies to the whole section,
Mhm.
okay. Well, yeah, I mean, it is out of context, so I wouldn't have known that, just.
Right.
Is that the sentence and the phrase post-secondary, taking out the sentence and putting the phrase post-secondary in.
That
is-
makes sense.
Is the same effect as adding the sentence in the first place.
It
in the
makes
fall.
sense, but I get that, but the fact that this whole insertion only applies to IA, which is only post-secondary buildings. Right? Okay,
We
Time
can
to-
provide, when we get to the public hearings, we can provide a little more context so people understand what that.
that would be good.
Sure, happy to do.
I mean, there's a lot of people who just don't remember things from.
Are
4
we
months
ready
ago.
for the motion then? Now that we all understand,
Michael, you want to make the motion?
yeah, I'll make it. I move to include the language as drafted in in proposed change above to the next round of amendments to the land development regulations.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Before you vote on it, just want to see if Lisa has anything she
Oh,
wants to
yeah, I
say.
was gonna ask. for you. Lisa,
Thank you, Paul. No, nothing to add. I appreciate the staff's taking a look at this and understanding our concern with the original language and just adapting it so that it meets everybody's goals. So appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for moving it up on the agenda.
no, sure. Okay, so we're ready to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous? Thank you, Lisa. So we're on item number 6.
Five?
Which is form-based codes, no,
Fine.
5,
It's
form-based code heights.
agenda item 5 on your agenda. We just moved 8
We moved
into
8, yeah.
Yeah,
that slot.
Or A.
4A.
So it's 4A, yeah.
Okay.
Heights.
Heights. So, as we talked about at the previous meeting, and the question was raised at the previous meeting, well, what about heights? What about streets? So this is the meeting for heights and streets.
Mhm.
Most of what we have to say is outlined in this memo. Are there any, I'd just like to start with, are there any particular questions that anyone had with the contents of the memo and things that you'd like to clarify before you will have a discussion about recommendations? Michael?
Quick spelling connection under the proposed specific heights, it should say occupied floor, not occupied flood.
What?
The first sentence, staff is recommending a combination of stories maximum feet to top occupied flood.
Persons.
I'm a Jane.
On page two,
Gonna say
top of
that.
page.
Mhm.
Okay.
Where's?
Yeah, that was weird.
Talking about out of context, talking about out of context.
I did have a question. Or maybe it's a proposal, you know, in a TND, we require a mix of housing types. For these multi-stories. So question that I had is for these multi-story residential buildings, should we not think about a mix of apartment sizes or types, you know, studio, one bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3, 4, which would certainly help with the diversity here, in my view.
Is this just form-based code discussion or is this more
This
general?
is form-based.
Form-based
code.
code.
Form-based code,
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Because I don't see we have any guidance as to, you know, they could build a whole building of studio apartments
Yes,
if they wanted to.
yes.
But is that something that we would like to see? I wouldn't.
I mean, it's only partially relevant, but I mean, I'm not actually sure building studios wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea. Saying there's a dearth of studios, but that's a whole
Yeah.
other discussion.
That's not the issue.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
But you know, I've you know this. I've spent a lot of time in Singapore because I had an office there for many years, and if you look at their housing board, most of those subsidized buildings have a mix of various size apartments going by number of bedrooms, 4, 3, 2, 1, and probably studio. It's, you know, it's there's probably a market for all of them, and it would add to the diversity of the population here because of a 4-bedroom will have a lot of children. Studio is one person.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear where you're coming from. I guess my only concern is how to make such a regulation in a way that's not just gonna, like, as we said, part of what the whole point of what we're doing is trying to. We've been hearing that the current ones we've been hearing from the developers that they've been too restrictive. I like that idea, but I like that in principle, but I guess I am hesitant to want seeing a version of that wouldn't just make it hard to develop those things. I mean, especially we have these kind of large blocky buildings, it can be tricky to make lots of bedrooms in them because you can't have a bedroom with no windows, which is part of why all these things end up being a one story, it's all 1 bedrooms in the middle and then 2 bedrooms on the corners, So I like the idea, but I guess I have a hard time immediately seeing a way to write that wouldn't instead
That's
be
up to them.
restrictive. I mean, fair. I mean,
If the commission likes the idea that it should be investigated by staff, and then fine, that's all. I'm just putting it on the table here because I think that they may be doing it already. I don't know.
Yeah, the question is how does the market look at that?
Mm.
You know, is the market saying, oh, there's better success by having a diversity of unit types in one
I would
building?
guess the market would.
Or, you know, because I've read a good bit about like it's not really co-housing, but
It's-
cooperative type buildings, you know, where they have more public space or more community space and stuff like that. And in some of those buildings, they actually get a pretty uniform type of person. It's, you know, it's like a lot of single people and young couples and stuff like that who like that particular type of
Co-housing is a
facility.
whole other subject,
It's not
which is a favorite of mine, but
co-housing, but
Jessica wants to.
it's a little bit
participate in
similar
this
to that.
discussion.
Yeah, I guess I was going to say, Michael, I think your idea is something we've talked about multiple times in the past. And for some reason, I thought it did get added to have multiple bedrooms. And maybe it was just that if there was multiple bedrooms, it counted as not as many units. when we had limits by units. Is that, and maybe that looks like Paul's looking something up, but we do something similar when a development has multiple buildings. You know, if it's multiple buildings, we say there needs to be a mix of building types. You know, if it's a multiple building type development. So, I mean, it seems like it'd be nice to have some kind of variety and configuration, like even if some are a studio and some are a 1 bedroom and some are a 2 bed. Like, I don't know if we need to say we need to have 4 bedrooms specifically, or to just have some kind of encouragement so it's not all exactly the same. You know, but I think it's a good idea.
Ellen?
Don't we have a section where we have amenities and you get extra points for doing X, Y, and Z?
So we have a section in the inclusionary zoning, Helen, I think maybe where you're thinking about it.
Oh,
So-
that's the
Oh,
only place? Oh. I thought there was more
Okay.
when we had where we were, maybe it's the DRB would look and say, oh, they get points because they're using this kind of siding and, or a different size entrance, or different, with the tall building setback, or.
So I think that's been part of the conversation in this round of amendments.
Uh-huh.
And I think that the draft that you have in front of you simplifies to not use points, but it does
Mhm.
encourage creativity and flexibility. So certainly, you know, this is your discussion to have about whether you want to do it. Do you want to speak to where it is?
See, I'm not familiar with, with what is,
Colin's waiting.
excuse me.
Colin?
I'm not,
Oh, said his
go
hand.
ahead.
One other, in terms of the mix of housing mix, I mean, one thing I guess I have been thinking about a fair amount is that my understanding at the moment is that currently outside the form-based code, unless you're in a PUD, it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's essentially you can't build a triple decker, i.e. 3 units on top of each other unless it one's a rooftop story. Like you get a lot of these kind of Boston wheels have like 3 to 4 floors, 1 unit per floor. And I think my understanding is currently the way our height limits on stories work, unless you do a PUD, you can only go up to like 5 stories if it's a large multi-unit building over 12. So if it's a 4-unit building, you're capped at like 4 total stories, but only 2 may face the street or something. And
There's, just to clarify the discussion that we're having, there's 2 different heights discussions that are happening with the planning commission. Today is the form-based code heights. And then what I think you're referring to is the heights table that is by building type that applies everywhere. The city has those forward-facing 2 stories, backward-facing 4, 3, 4 stories. That is a different project that Nick Atherton's been working on. That's not the topic we're talking about today, but is that what?
you know,
Is that a
I'm
segue into?
yeah, I guess I'm aware of that. So I guess my question is, that type of building doesn't exist much in the city. Are there ways that we can write this form-based code to encourage more of that type of development, say on the transitional areas on the peripheries of this form-based districts? Like essentially, like we currently have a whole lot of these kind of very large, long 4-story apartment buildings with tons and tons of units. Can we, for example, like see a way to make these like 4-story, but like 1 unit per floor, which lend themselves a lot more naturally towards having more bedrooms per unit, because you can have an entire floor with 4 bedrooms on 1 in each corner. And I've lived in places like that in the past. And I guess I'm wondering if that would be a way of sort of encouraging diversity of housing types. So maybe like, hey, these big buildings are going to be mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms, but will encourage kind of like skinnier buildings that might have more of these higher like unit counts, even if it's not in the same building, is what I'm trying to say.
Abby's on her way out then.
So that, in T3 and T3 plus, which is really the end of Market Street at this point. That, like, have you seen the townhouses that?
Yeah, they're townhouses, but
Yeah,
like they're,
absolutely. But like, that's the sort of scale of that T3 transit zone.
yeah.
So that is sort of what you're talking about, the sort of peripheries.
Mhm.
That's the only T3 section, unless I'm,
Off Barrett Street, there's a section.
there's a little bit off of Barrett Street as well. So yeah, that sort of scale of housing and that kind of stacked triplex is something that's T3 and not
Yeah.
T4, T5.
Yeah, and that was my understanding, so I guess can we maybe, is there a feeling that maybe that will in itself provide the housing mixture as opposed to requiring that there's a diversity within each building? I don't immediately know the answer to that, but I wonder if that's gonna do it now, because it's hard to see, there hasn't been that much development in T3. I mean, there's that one row of townhouses, but it's a little hard to see how that's gonna get
Well,
built
the
out.
T3 will expand on the other side of the road.
Yes, it's hard for me to envision exactly what the market will build there when all we see is a row of townhouses there.
Yeah, my understanding, and Mike Semino and I live in the same neighborhood, so we chat. And, it just strikes me that the real estate industry they have a sense of what they find the market
Yep.
needs.
Yeah.
And they don't like to be told what to build. You know, I don't know to what degree, sort of trying to say, this is what you should build is gonna change what they build. Because they're gonna build what they want, like the form-based code said that these housing on the next block was supposed to be 5 stories. Well, it's not, because they didn't want to build 5 stories.
Right.
And I don't know how many bedrooms, I think a lot of those are 2 and 3 bedrooms? Or are they mixed?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, I know somebody lives in this one and I think it's like a 3-bedroom unit right on the corner and stuff like that. It's
How many bedroom
big
units are
units.
these down here?
The townhouses?
no, these buildings next door.
Right next door here.
Oh,
The immediately next door, I'd have to look at, they increased the bedroom per unit count. So when, to include a number of reads. Mostly Allard Square is studios and 1 bedroom because of their target market.
Yeah.
The building that is on the far side of Garden Street is a mix of 2s, 3s, and 4s. There's a couple of 4 bedrooms in there.
So the market and the developers have already taken care of my question, in a way.
Well, I guess there's a question, how many, are there efficiencies in any of those buildings? Which would be the lowest cost ones? So,
There are studios in some of the buildings. I don't know that these ones have them because these ones were programmed in concert with UVM and UVMMC
Right.
to what they were targeting. But I believe that there's at least some in the 1068 Williston Road where used to be the Holiday Inn site.
Mhm.
And then there are a mix of studios and 1s and 2s in the 2 buildings that have been built on Quarry Hill Road under the form-based code, the flat roof ones. So that there is a mix of some of those there.
so maybe we don't need to
No.
really force the issue.
That's all.
Yeah,
Okay, so if that's the case, I'll change the subject.
okay.
My question is why 14? And I don't mean why 14 as in
Yeah.
14, but why have a number at all? I mean, why not 15? Why not 17? Why not 25?
yeah, so we did a little bit of snooping around, larger cities, sort of cities that are bigger, generally bigger than us, but in the sort of comparable-ish range of newer downtowns, newer sort of building up from single families and single floor buildings. 14 felt like a good number for a full maximum that doesn't look that imposing. It's
Looks like a
certainly,
skyscraper.
it's certainly impactful, but it definitely has a different visual impact than something that is 40 stories. We looked at a couple of examples that were like 18, 19, and they look big. They look really big. We're 14. It still feels sort of mid-rise, which is on the low end of mid-rise for, big cities, but it does sort of have it still sort of blends into what else is going on around it, because we're cognizant of this area is not gonna just go and everything get built all at once. So having kind of a building and then maybe the next building's this big and the next building's that big, and maybe it skips a couple of lots because they don't get redeveloped and then another one comes up that having sort of standalone buildings in the 14 range, meant that they wouldn't look so jarring, as much more than that.
Will there be a 13th floor?
What?
Will there be a 13th?
That's
floor?
up to them, not up to me.
I mean,
So-
there's,
This is not
It
Japan.
doesn't matter how you count them apparently,
Right,
but
and
just
so,
how many there
so that was also
actually
the reason
physically
that we
there.
put in that, a maximum feet of height as well.
Yeah.
To keep in the tables that I put in with the math on it, that with the range in, allowing flexibility in the height of any given floor, you could end up with a 14-story building that's 50 feet higher than the 14-story building next to it. So to be truly 14 stories and to meet the maximum height, that's basically a fairly full out first floor, like a good commercial space first floor, and then 10-foot stories above it. So it's pretty much the shortest a 14-story building could be, is the maximum that we've set. So for buildings to actually be set to be actually built to 14 stories, probably. But it's also potential that we end up with 2 floors of commercial for some reason, and then, only 10 stories above that. But the idea being that that sort of maximum height was reasonable and also encouraged more like shorter ceilings and more units.
and reiterate again, within form-based code, what area is that? That's the other side of Williston Road, Quarry Hill.
So in the draft that you talked about at your last meeting, the T5 would be Market Street and then Dorset Street from essentially Healthy Living up to Williston Road. That would allow the 14 stories, and then the T4 becomes the rest of the area that you think of as being commercial on this side of the highway. San Remo Drive, U Mall, Price Chopper Plaza, the Alpine Shop where that used to be, higher ground, that kind of area, and then the Doubletree Hotel and across from it where the Staples Plaza is. And there's one or two lots behind the Staples Plaza that have not been built on, but otherwise it's built up.
And plenty of places along Williston Road that, that are
Right, for
1950s
reinvestment.
buildings, yeah,
And
absolutely.
those are the T4.
Yeah,
So
Yeah, can I, this is pertinent to what we were just talking about. Someplace I thought I read that there was gonna be some kind of diagram or some kind of maybe massing. Cause this is something you really have to look at in 3 dimensions. Or at least something simulated in 3 dimensions to see, where does the mass go? Because, I mean, certainly other places I've lived and done architectural work, there's always a real concern for what are you shadowing? When you build a tall building, for instance, if somebody built a tall building across the street from this, your solar panels wouldn't work. So, that is an issue. There's people who get very upset when they no longer have sun coming in their windows. Because a very tall building, maybe a block away in the wintertime, is blocking their sunlight. And so the massing diagrams could save you a lot of problems down the road by, really understanding. It's like, well, where's solar access going to be least affected? And so certainly anything on the north side of Williston Road is perfect until you get closer to the residential areas. And then in the west, there's going to be a big shadow coming down over houses that are,
In
just
that
off of
area,
Patchen
there's a
Road and
pretty
stuff.
substantial
Ravine.
wetland and ravine back there that
Yeah,
creates
that's
a natural
perfect.
barrier.
It's perfect for
That's
the north.
in that area that's not really much to
Right.
be.
Concerned
Yeah.
about. Yeah, that's an ideal place, whereas. I mean, on Dorset Street, because it's a north-south street, it's probably not gonna be as big an issue there.
One area that we
Here-
were aware of, just to speak to
Any
that.
place here in this, in the Market Street area and stuff like that, I think it could be potentially be a pretty big issue, just because. The streets are kind of going somewhat east-west. And so a tall building over on that side is gonna have quite an impact if it's but the massing has a lot to do with it too. Because you're starting to see these buildings in New York City now, they're really, really tall and very slender because they can do that. But the effect of something like, you know, what we used to, used to build for, senior housing, often they were often 14 stories. And they were some of them were rather long. And from certain angles, that had a tremendous impact on any neighborhood, because they had to go into downtown areas and they were often right next to 2-story, Victorian houses and stuff like that. So it was often pretty jarring. So that's just a consideration that I think you might, if you had the 3-dimensional kind of just lay it out and say, this is an example of what could be built and what 14 stories looks like in comparison to what's here right now. Just so we can see it.
2 things. One, there were certain specific areas that this draft does consider those exact issues. The current form-based code also does, basically, as it places within 150 feet of either the low-scale neighborhood or the T3, which makes the east end of Market Street, as well as portions of the first block of San Remo Drive, for that exact reason.
And the Hannaford Party City section of the new law.
Secondly, when you would like, we do have that. A rough 3D visualization if you'd like to look at.
Well, I think anybody who reads this would like to see that.
I mean, I've got it on my computer.
Just go back, sorry, just right, so, I'm getting confused, are we redrawing T5 as part of this too, or no?
So at your last meeting, you talked about expanding T5 to be Dorset Street from Healthy Living up to Williston Road. So with that assumed, then the heights would roll with that.
Okay,
Applicable in those areas.
and
But they're independent decisions. You can say, oh, we only want it to go from Garden Street north, in which case the heights would apply to wherever you draw the T5.
Got it. But my understanding is the main difference in T5 and T4 is that T5 has much stronger like commercial requirements, like for like ground floor retail. And now it gets plus 2 stories, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So that is essentially the difference today as well.
Yes.
It's just the 2 stories are lower, but that is the primary difference. The standards, the building standards are tighter also. The doorway spacing has to be a little bit more frequent. The building breaks have to be a little bit more frequent, like that kind of thing. But it's those are the big differences. Did you share that comparison?
Yep.
Yes, okay.
The parking issues or, I know it's kind of in the form-based code, but
Yeah, I think
that's gonna be a
Gonna
real
cost it.
restriction.
Sure, and I
gonna
think
be a
that's
major
a
restriction.
real world restriction and a practical restriction, depending on what people want to build and how they want to build it. But in my opinion, I believe in Paul's opinion, setting our limitations higher allows the builders to make those decisions. If they're going to pay for 2 floors of underground parking because they want all of their units to have assigned spaces or whatever it is, like they can make those financial decisions. We're not telling them that they have to only be 8 stories tall. We're saying you can be 14 and you can make it work however you want to make it work. But
yeah, and I'd say complementary to that, we're having the very beginnings of, we're doing a study right now on what a private public parking model would look like, that over time one could imagine that entities that either have parking or need parking would have a structure by which they can share it either all the time or in off-peak hours. And so that's kind of how we're looking at it, is to not over-regulate that subject, but acknowledge that may mean in the short term, we don't see any buildings at this height.
Yeah,
it's
a lot of
it's the same as
Excuse me, can we ask the chair to speak? Because people are waiting, but you're all just butting in.
We're having
Yeah,
It's on the same topic, though. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
we're
yeah.
not changing the topic, we're still just continuing.
yeah, but the other people
topic.
might want to have, might want to speak on the same topic as well. So Helen wants to speak.
Well, this is sort of an additional thought, because I don't know the answer to it. Where does the city think about and respond to both open space and frankly dog park space for a 14-story building? If we had several of them built in right where we want to in our city center, how do we manage that? Or are we silent on that?
As drafted, the site amenity requirement applies to each unit, so or each square footage. So as you add square footage, up goes your requirement as well. And so that would be typically the way that we would regulate it. What we've seen happening in some parts of the city, like on Farrell Street, is in addition to that, some developers are finding that that's in their own interest to be providing it beyond what we require as well. So Farrell Street has a little private
You
dog,
do have a little dog park.
but we have managed it thus far through the site amenity requirement.
Okay. And then the premise or the hope is that as a city, we have sufficient open and recreation space for several 14-story buildings, which is, that's a lot of people.
So I think there's a combination of things. There's the site amenity requirement that Paul mentioned. There's also an ongoing parks and open space master plan process.
Uh-huh.
And I was actually in a meeting immediately before this meeting. So those are things that are being considered in that sort of master planning process as well, from the,
Right.
instead of on a development by development
Okay.
phase, it's something that the recognizing the population and the demographics of South Burlington are changing. And also, ongoing discussions about recreational and civic event space of some kind in city center and what the council is going to decide to do about that question. I think those are a few open studies and questions that all contribute to the same thing that you're talking about.
Well, that's good. I think that's really important for the whole quality of life and what our vision is in terms of the city plan, all the aspects of the city plan, not just addressing a housing shortage. Thank you.
Colin?
Does,
I did just while we're talking parking have one I guess comment. So I understand at the moment we currently do have a parking maximum that only applies to residential units at the moment. And I would say I personally would at some point like to talk more about maybe starting to talk about parking maximums for commercial space. I get that's a very big question that's got very complicated answers, depend on land use, yada yada yada. But at the very least, so for the residential units, I don't think it makes that much difference here, just because most of these buildings are, or a lot of them are mixed use anyways, which means that the maximums don't require them all. But that said, I do still sort of feel like the current parking maximums are set very high. At the very least, the 2 per unit, while that's not that out of whack, I mean, it's high is very relative, but like, for example, a 2 per unit, if you have a 1-bedroom, is extremely high. I mean, my back of the envelope, this kind of potential switch might be, say, 2 per unit, or two per unit of 2 bedrooms or more. For a studio or 1-bedroom, 1.5 spaces per parking, per 1.5 spaces per unit for 1-bedroom and studios. That's not that restrictive. I mean, as an example, I did the numbers on my current building, which is like about 90% 1-bedroom and studios. Sorry, 80% 1-bedroom and studios. And it currently, under this thing I'd be proposing of 1.5 for 1-bedroom, 2 for 2 and above, would be about 5 below what my building currently has. And I have never seen more than 10, so I've never seen fewer than 10 empty spaces at this building. So I think, for example, in the case where I live, I think that actually would have benefited, like, it has like 44 units and it has 76 accounted park spaces. There's always 10 free. I think 1.5 to 1 bedroom would be and 2 for 2 and above would be a kind of, that wouldn't have too many like concerns from developers. It's not that restrictive, but I think it would be a bit more restrictive and perhaps this result in a bit less underutilized parking spaces. Again, that said, this only applies to residential only units, buildings, so it's not that many buildings, but that's that's why I propose it.
No, I had the same question, but it's not on this particular item, but on the T3 and T3 plus, we've got 3 max. And if you had three families, there's 9 spaces. That's a lot of cars for 3 families.
We can certainly take a look at this. What I'd say is that
I think we should-
your neighborhood, Colin, where you live, back as recently as 2012, we required a minimum of 2 1/4.
Oh, okay, that's.
And then at the developer's request, we dropped it for studio and 1 bedrooms to 1.5. So if you fast forward a couple of years to the first form-based code, the idea of any maximum was pretty new.
Yeah.
And then 2 years after that, in about 2018, the planning commission recommended to the council and the council approved eliminating all minimums except for multifamily of having, I think, 1 per unit outside of the form-based code. And so that's where we got to there is no minimum, but this was the first step into
Yeah, I
something
don't understand, yeah.
approximating a maximum.
Mhm.
So it's not surprising to me that it's a fairly high threshold, because the context was we had been saying minimums before.
Yeah.
So we're certainly
We're on
happy to take
heights.
a look and see if.
Right? We're still on heights.
Well, they're
Well,
connected.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
form-based
Amount of
codes.
parking is.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
parking
it's-
is in
how many-
another.
But they're related. They are related. You can
That's
only
fine.
build as
This is
high
also
as you
related.
put
Does
parking in.
any of the commissioners have a problem or concern about going from 12 to 13 and from 14 to 15 floors when there's an affordable housing bonus for an extra floor? Is 13 and 15 too much for
Well,
everybody? Anybody?
Might be
Yeah,
other
so-
limitations.
Jessica,
I'm still not convinced that that's the right number. I mean, I think, Paul, I think a little bit ago you asked, like, when would be a good time to see some visualizations? And I think I'd like to see some before I say, okay, this 14 sounds like a good number. Like,
Good number, yeah.
it's so different than what we have. I just feel like having a little more backup on, some of the things Kelsey was saying earlier, like, we looked at equivalent cities, like maybe what are they, or there's some maybe like street views we could look at from some of those spots. I tried like Googling like 12-story building. It's like just hard to like get a sense of like what that means. And are there any spots in Vermont or like other communities that some of us might be able to picture? I'm not opposed to going taller, like at I feel like it's a big enough difference that it'd be really nice to be able to really picture it a little bit better and be able to like present something to the public when we say this is the number we're talking about, because it's just very different than what we have now. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. I'm just saying I think it'd be nice to be able to have a little more examples of like how it works. And I do think the parking and the open space come into it and what that looks like. So I think some of the discussion we're having isn't off base. It is part of it. Like if you just have one very tall thing and then a sea of parking, it's maybe not what we're trying to get either. So
I think that's really important for the public and will certainly help us decide as well as the council. And so the more embracing you can get from the public, the better this might go, versus sort of going off on 14 because someone recommended 14 or 12 and then not seeing the visualization could really backfire and just, you know.
Yeah, I agree, Han, and I think that's my hesitation. Like even if I felt like 14 sounds great, I'd like to be able to have better backup to be able to show
Mhm.
people. And I also think along the same lines that 150 feet, like, is there a reason it's 150 versus 200? Is that based on shadowing or maybe some examples people have
Mhm.
seen places where the visual, like it visually worked, or when you're standing on the street or in your backyard 150 feet from a tall building? I don't know, a little more about the feel of it, I think.
Mhm.
A quick note, I think one example that would be City Place Burlington, if you're asking for about build at this size. I can't remember off the top of my head if it's 12 or 14, but that is a local example of something that we're proposing here.
Yeah, and that's.
Yeah, and that's a hard one because we all call it the pit, right? I think I think so many people think of it as the pit. It's hard to like get someone to have like a good association, but it's true. If we could encourage people to maybe drive by there in its current state.
And is that 14 stories now, I think?
The building that is approved but is not built is 14, and the one that is under construction is
It's
12.
the elevator shaft is built, right?
Oh, no,
The sort of
buildings.
standalone and elevator shaft.
But
One
one's
that is
almost
largely
finished.
built is
There's-
11 or 12.
Multiple buildings.
Yeah, there's
Section.
multiple.
Yeah.
And I think that the City Place is actually a really good example too, because I think you have to sort of look at potentially what the massing is of a tall building, because as I mentioned before, a tall building that is relatively thin has an awful lot less impact on, on the visual impact than does a long building. Think beachfront hotels, really massive buildings, very large buildings. And they have a very overwhelming impact.
Mhm.
I mean, these buildings have an overwhelming impact, but they're set in the middle of the city. And so it's surprising because you never see it like this. You see it looking down a street, and somehow it doesn't look as big because you see the setbacks. And it's very interesting, but the more block-like the buildings are, the more impact it has visually.
Well, and that's what the intention of the building envelope standards is, like requiring different breaks, different step backs, bigger step backs to count, bigger changes in height to count, having different roof lines and allowing rooftop structures that vary at the top of the building. There's a lot built into the BES tables about things that we talked about mostly last meeting that are intended to reduce the overall sort of visual impact of a building, especially from street level.
Right, and yet, I kind of like the way architecturally, these buildings have a more unifying effect. I just would hate to see those buildings, divided up into black and white boxes. I think it would be a lot more visual impact with that, because that's what we're getting a lot of, it's the 2020s look is black and white, in different color boxes and things like that. And I mean, I was reading over all of these building breaks and clarifying the building breaks criteria. And I was looking at photographs that I had taken in Copenhagen and in Amsterdam. And it was very interesting how many of those buildings did not meet these standards. Because their building breaks were ornamental.
Yep.
They were uniform materials, sometimes not brick, many times they were brick. But when you looked at what made the variety in the buildings, it usually was cornices, it was, bits of architectural detail that differentiated them from each other, even though they were all the same materials.
So in the building breaks, those are options. You don't have to do all of those things to be a building break. And the things that are written like permanent awnings, different sort of structural texture on the facade, window proportions. I haven't updated the language on high quality brick, but high quality would, I have to work on a definition that makes a sort of comprehensive sense, but things like keystones above windows and cornices and like different patterning.
Architectural ornamentation.
Yeah, like that lion that we saw that picture of the brick lion. Was that the
What?
Ryan? You had showed us that photo of, I think it was a brick lion. Like,
It's a bulldog in St.
oh,
Albans.
it's a bulldog.
Oh, bulldog.
Like that should count.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Donna, the way that's written is it's taking what has resulted in similar looking buildings is a much narrower version of what qualifies as a building break, and the intention of that section that's in the text of Article 8, is to expand what counts as a building break. So stacked balconies would count as a building break. So these different things are things that were not counting before that would count now.
Oh, I agree, it's been an improvement. But just the fact that there's no mention of the words architectural ornamentation, which kind of is what most buildings from the 19th and 20th century, that was how they made their street look lively, because the facades were not identical. They're
No.
very, very similar, but
Buildings
they're not
that,
identical.
they were side by side, but built 100 years apart.
Or even built 20 years
Or-
apart, but
Right, and that's
it's
one of our
called
challenges.
it's called
is that
contextualism,
Thus far, everything's been built within the same time period.
and by the same firm.
Yeah, that more than
Using
anything.
the same concrete.
Would you like to see a initial 3D rendering?
Sure.
Yeah,
Very much so.
So please take the caveat that this is a very first cut, and as of 2 weeks ago, I had never used SketchUp in my life. So you just set your expectations where they lie. So just to orient you, I'm gonna start by, this is Market Street right here, obviously City Hall, Allard Square. This imagery that you're seeing is Google Earth. It has its own way of using somehow the street views to then project and make a 3D rendering, so we use that as the base.
Cool,
And it's aerial imagery, yeah.
nice.
And so I'm gonna go up to Dorset Street and then I'm gonna turn around. Hopefully. There we go.
There you go.
Colin, well, Paul was
Oh,
doing
wow,
this.
during construction.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry, you wanted to say something, Paul? Was
Oh, that's the parking garage
He's-
right.
Sears.
Yep.
Wow.
Now
Okay,
He
so
has quite a presence.
this is
Yeah.
what we have today. So I'm gonna pop on a few buildings here. So this gray thing that you just see up here, that's City Place. Roughly. So that is City Place in Burlington, popped on
Oh,
right
oh.
there.
Okay.
If you put
Maybe
it,
you lost big.
With no texture, with no step out.
right,
with
this
no
is sort of a
variation.
worst
This is a
case,
block.
like,
Well,
let's
that's
take
how
the
small that looks.
right? And that's as an 11-story building, just for fun. I went into the Griffintown neighborhood of Montreal, where there's been a lot of development in the last few years.
Yeah.
And I popped in a 14-story building that was there, and that's this one right there. So that's a 14-story, largely residential building in downtown Montreal.
You have to be careful about presenting them like that, because then they end up building them like that.
Is this in one of the
This is where my skill set,
What do you,
The gateway.
So you have to be careful about presenting them like that, because
That's the
they end
only
up
key.
building them like that.
Okay.
all right, so gonna
Add
add
a
a
few
few in
doors and
here.
windows in your set.
I put a 5-story building, right here on the on the Blue Mall property. This is if the Blissby building on Shelburne Road was built and added one more story to it. So you know that large
the
building
Larkin
there,
building?
Oh, yeah.
the Larkin Terrace building.
Fayette and Shelburne.
I then grabbed on Pine Street in Burlington, right near City Place. there's the old People's Bank building, and immediately next to it is a 9-story residential tower that's been built,
The new one?
the new ones.
Yeah.
And so
Somebody
I,
wants to
so I
join.
added, what would those be like if we built 2 of those in here?
Mhm.
Oh, somebody wants to join our meeting, just a moment. And then, I added in a, 12-story 14-story commercial building. Hang on,
Which just obliterated the other two.
so, Kelsey, I need you to run this part. There's a bunch of people who popped in the last time this happened.
I know.
With the thing, so can you be doing that on here? So I'm gonna let them in because they can be let in, but,
That's a 12-story closer to us. Because those lines don't line up at all. In perspective. Yeah.
so in the distance is a building that I've just popped in.
Hey guys, I have a quick question.
Wait, just,
No, that's a.
Have you guys ever been raped?
Oh,
By the CCP nigger now bow down to love and light. CCP thugs and Corey's clan fish empire nigger you've been thugged by the CCP nigger now bow down.
Ku Klux Klan. We hate niggers, we hate Jews, we hate faggots, and we hate spicks.
That's so good.
yeah,
Welcome to the internet.
yeah.
okay,
So Colin, I have to
so
tell
if we
you
get
something.
any more, I won't let them in, but
Tim Barrett, who's right behind you,
Oh.
is one of the people who's responsible for how tall your building is.
Oh, my one's, oh,
Cause Tim lived in the neighborhood right
Cool.
next door,
are you talking about?
way back when they were first developing Farrell Street, you know? Yeah,
Nifty.
okay, so sorry, I got a little bit distracted
There you
there.
go.
What was your,
Yeah.
what was your question, Colin?
What was it?
So I'm sorry, maybe it was Ryan. So at this corner here, I put in a building that was about 150 feet in height. So that's sort of getting
That's
close to the
maximum.
14 stories, but maybe if it was commercial, it's a little less. Just from a massing perspective, and I can turn this around, I took the building immediately next to us, the L shape that's just been built, and popped it in there and then made it bigger. So I can turn this around so you
Oh,
can
that's a
see.
huge building then.
It is a big building, and that's what I was trying to show, what would a really big building
Yeah,
look
that would
like.
be a really big,
Like
like a whole block, 14 stories tall.
and if, interestingly, the City Place building that's under construction now is a U-shaped building, not the one that I showed the image of before.
But certainly if you had setbacks at different levels, it would look a lot less massive.
Right, and this is,
And that would give it some interest as well, whether you had
And
little
this is-
lions up there or gargoyles or whatever.
right, and intentionally, Alan, this is just the most blocky version
Mhm.
it could possibly look like to give you the most.
Uh-huh, yeah.
I of. Like, sorry, on topic of massing, I guess I had 2 potential things I was thinking about is, first of all, we have these sort of building setbacks from the curb. Would we want to consider doing some form of thing saying above X height, you can only have this amount of distance, like, or frontage or something, saying like, I've seen I've heard other cities do that too, we're saying like, yeah, right, New York City too, like sort of saying like, oh, like maybe you have to have 2 towers like with a gap in between or something, like you might have 4-story, then like 2 towers on one end, which sort of breaks up the, for daylight perspective, yes, but I don't know if people think that would just look weird or something.
Well,
It
that's what-
actually, yeah, it actually has a lot to do with the livability of
Yeah.
the building too, because
Yeah, too.
it's one of the things we're finding, more sustainable buildings, tend to have smaller footprints. Just because, you wanna have daylight and you wanna have windows, that are, not 80 feet away from where you're sitting.
Yeah, agreed, but yeah, no, I totally, I guess I was just, so I guess I was wondering if we should. if you want to have more strict limits on how wide the building could be as you get taller. Because at the moment, there's that like 8-foot setback or something above 4 stories, but there's not a whole lot else.
Limitations, it's like office buildings are the only buildings that, and
But-
warehouses are the only things you can build really massively like that.
You could build that giant L-shaped building though, and I would argue
Those
that,
are residential apartments.
yeah, and I would argue that looks perfectly fine on a 4-story building. Here, this is feeling a bit big, and I wonder, like, for example, if you basically said, hey, you can't do something quite that big if it's that tall, so shorter.
There's rules in there about.
It's like a 12-foot setback, it's not that big, is it? May have missed something else.
Certain levels that it's set
Oh, look
back
at what
after
you're
4
about to do.
stories or something.
And there's also landscaping in the setback.
Largely, yes. I did want to show you at the east end of Market Street, showing a step back after the 3rd story.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to see that,
Sure.
that's a different, showing the
Different view.
context sensitivity to it. So let me show you that, and then this can be manipulated more, and this was just a first cut. So if you want to see more of this, I didn't want to go and make, 30 buildings if you didn't.
I mean, it's helpful, thanks for making those.
Yeah, I
Paint-
mean,
paint some
even
murals.
just this is very good for context.
So just give me a second here to.
It's rich, totally.
But yeah, I think you don't want to show the public something like that. That might be a little much. We do tend to see a lot of blocky buildings around here as opposed to, ones that have nicely architecturally delineated
Mhm.
corners and, steps and things like that. Well, there's some steps.
So I
With
took a
the
large
green
building
thing.
intentionally to look big, but this is the, this would be a 5-story building that had a step back of 12 feet after 3 stories.
Is this T3 here?
This is currently T3 on this side. This is currently T3 plus, which allows another story. And what you talked about at your last meeting
Right.
was T4, but with a stepping up. So this would say for the first 150 feet, you would only be eligible for 5 stories, and after 2 stories, you have to step back. So behind this building, if you built another building back in the corner there, it could be taller, but this would be the maximum that you could build at this corner.
Mhm.
And
Is that an animal on the side or what is that?
that is a tree sticking through because it is the visualization of a tree.
Oh,
It's sort of
okay.
Google Earth, having drawn a tree and then be putting a building on it, and I don't know what's his
It's
happening
Godzilla.
on that.
It's a tall tree.
Godzilla.
Taller than 5 stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So Ryan, we're a half hour over, so make it very quick.
Yes, so one of the things that we encounter when we're trying to make a space that is multimodal is that if we put buildings street front, then it needs to be a primary function of a street. If they're up to the property line, if it is not a street function, meaning lots of stores to go into street parking on the side, they should not be to the front. I think Dorset Street Dermatology is a great example. It is only 2 stories. It completely overmasses that section. There's 20 feet between the curb line and that building. And all it does is it sandwiches people between an echoey building and fast moving traffic. It's terrible. Also, cars can't see around it. So by default, they always pull across the crosswalk before stop. And so when we look at a corner like that, we need to be able to say, if it's to the front of the property line, there has to be at least parallel parking, if not diagonal parking. And then you need to have a 10-foot, so either you have sidewalk with the street trees, or you have 10 feet of green space that the trees actually have space to have roots in. And when you do that, when you have that space for all the car massing and travel, then you can get away with things like that. Or you have to drastically reduce the presence of motor vehicles in a way that is probably too uncomfortable for the voters in South Burlington, which is a predominantly suburban community. So that's a big trade-off here.
somebody smashed into the back of my car across the street. I was making a left turn onto San Remo, right in front of that building, and went across the lanes and took out the light post there.
Is that why they don't work anymore?
I don't know.
There's like six
that's-
lights that are out right around that.
Yeah, that happened to me on,
You were turning on Brookwood?
I was turning into San Remo. I was in the left turn
Oh,
lane.
left turn.
Yeah, and she hit me and took out the back of my car and then the post across the street. So anecdotal, but
Val, it's a very unpleasant and unsafe.
yeah.
So
it
we need
really
to move
is.
on to other discussions. What is the general feeling from the commission at this point about Heights has proposed? Like there's definitely more space to tweak things, to add other requirements. I would caution against adding too many requirements because it's exactly where we got into where we are now. But the direction that we need as staff from all of you are these numbers that you want to go forward with? Do you want to reduce them? Do you want to, are there subject areas of restriction that you'd like us to further explore for the next meeting? What is?
Can I interject with just a process question, just so
Yep.
that you can consider this? So our hope is that sometime in the next couple of meetings, that you feel that what you have is something that you're ready to have the public take a look at. We're then scheduling about 5 weeks of time when the drafts that you have would be out there, not formal public hearings, but just a chance for people to digest them while you work on some of the other amendments that the uses stuff, the east end of the city part, and then together when you're ready for a public hearing package. So consider what you would like to have the public have a chance to digest and think about. So that's my process.
I had this question about going from 12 to 13 and from 14 to 15. There seem to be quite a few of us are concerned about 14 being pretty high. So the question I have, should we reduce it to 11 and 13 so that when there's an affordable housing bonus, it's 12 and 14?
Well,
That's a question for.
yeah, I'll fault this one, and I apologize if this is complicating things further, but my understanding is that bonus you speak of is if you hit 20% for residential buildings, which we require for everything above 25 units, so that'll apply to basically every residential building that would actually be hitting that.
Yes.
A fault of that is currently how we have it done elsewhere in the city. My understanding this doesn't apply currently to the form-based code, is that if you go above and beyond the affordable limit, you get an additional bonus story.
No.
Yeah, for multifamily. Yeah, we just added that, didn't we?
As
It's 5,
Yeah.
and it's 6
Right.
with affordable housing.
Yes.
If you do more affordable housing, you get a 7.
Right,
We just added that a few
Yeah,
months back.
yeah.
right, I remember that.
But that's outside form-based.
Yes, currently. I personally will be interested in exploring adding that here too, to sort of try to incur with potentially some changes to where the threshold is, but making a way to try and incentivize people using height as a way to incentivize going above and beyond the minimums for affordable housing. Maybe that's a discussion is too big for today, but that would, I think it would impact a little bit the heights, because potentially you might be adding another story on top of that if we were to add that.
So I guess the question is, do you want to regulate to the? You can sort of decide it, you can discuss it and decide it a couple different ways. You can kind of say like, this is the maximum that we are comfortable with is 15 stories. So if that was pulled into the form-based code, that means that the base would have to be 13.
12.
No, adding 2.
Oh, 13, yeah.
13. So, or do you say, we like 15 or we like 15 and then we feel like, yeah, okay, the residential housing will make it 16, but that's kind of the same, and very few people, if anybody, are going to do the 17. Like thinking about what are your maximums versus what are your maximums with the maximum that could be, because the thing to be clear on is hypothetically someone comes in and builds a hotel that has no residential in it. there would be a set maximum of height, like the way it's written, it'd be 14 stories. It wouldn't be 16 stories.
And it might be a little bit less because there's also the height number. So if they want
Right, and-
taller stories for their hotel, it might wind up being
Right.
12 or 13 rather than
Sure.
14.
The effect of the state statute means that any of these buildings of this scale that we're talking about, the combination of the state statute and the South Burlington mandatory rule is that you'd always end up allowing taller residential buildings than completely commercial buildings.
I'm fine with that, but yeah.
I'm just making it very clear.
Just another person you wanna check with is the fire marshal. Because they may have some practical reason to limit the height of the building to what they are trained or feel like they're capable.
Part of what I
handling.
described the 5 weeks is also internal review of, we don't want to send them draft after draft after draft, but we
Right.
would certainly seek their feedback on exactly questions like that.
Yeah,
If
they
They
would-
would come back and say, there's a giant break at 17 stories if you do more than 17 or more than 13 or whatever, all of a sudden, we have to buy.
The super big fire.
We have
Right,
to
'cause
have
I
two
remember-
fire trucks respond to it that
Yeah.
are ladder trucks or
I
something.
remember being in a town where 8 stories.
So
that was
what
it.
is the,
Couldn't go above 8
commission
stories. That
comfortable
was their
with to
limit.
put into the draft that would be circulated? So that's what we're talking about now is, as Paul said, the sort of 5 weeks review period. That would be other departments internally, fire department, but also the larger developers who have been involved in the city center up to now and also would be in the future, like the UML property, other players like that. So at this point, it's not about warning a public hearing with these numbers, but it's what are the numbers that the planning commission would like to put in the sort of 92% draft that would be going out for vetting with these other groups.
Well,
I'm okay with the 14, but I have to qualify that because with a maximum affordable housing, that could go to 16.
Correct.
And I'm not sure that that's getting pretty tall for where we are.
So it sounds like, Michael, you'd like to see them reduced by 1 story so
Yep.
that they accommodate the one
Yep.
affordable unit, just so that we're sort of moving forward.
Go one down with the base.
I'm okay with the higher stories, but I really do want to see some 3D pictures for both the public and for the planning commission to really see what this might look like before I say, yeah, 14's the number. Because maybe 12 is a better number, especially if you can add a level if you do affordable housing.
Well, we're suggesting 13 to start with, and with affordable housing, the maximum would be 15.
Right, and I'm saying maybe that we should say 12. So the maximum then becomes 14. But I just want to see some pictures of this so we get a sense of what it might look like.
Oh, when you do pictures, put windows and balconies and,
Yeah, and you make it
Gardens
look
on the
like it
roof.
might look nice.
yeah, I mean, you really have to,
Setbacks, the lot.
when you present the blocks to people, I mean, you'll get nothing. You'll get, no, we don't have 14-story buildings. If you put a garden on the roof, put balconies and windows, make a huge difference.
Landscaping in the setback.
Murals.
You know, you SketchUp, Paul?
I mean, there's.
No, it really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Jessica?
Well, I do think the SketchUp is helpful. I mean, it did make me feel like I really agree with Colin's thing about once you get a certain height, it really shouldn't be so wide. If there's some way to like go to towers or some way of breaking it up so it's not so wide, so high. It just feels like something like that. And then, I mean, I'm based on those and some of the examples I've heard, I'm still feeling more comfortable in the like 10 to 12-ish range. I mean, by the time you're getting to 16 feels like beyond. But I mean, I think that we should look at some pictures and then like think about maybe some other things we've talked about and then get back to it at a future meeting, because I know there's other stuff on the agenda for tonight. I think there's just some of us that until we see a little bit more examples or maybe pinpoints on Google where we could like look at Street View or go out there, I think it might be hard to come up with a number tonight.
Colin, you get the last comment.
Okay, I have a couple more, but we can probably save this for another week, but in terms of an actual number, I am fine personally, but I understand there's, we definitely, have different opinions on this. I am fine keeping it at 14, even if it does go to 15 or 16, two reasons. First of all, I grew up in a small town in South Burlington size that had a fairly skinny 16-story building in it for some reason. I don't know how that happened. It did. It was fine. It really didn't bug anyone. Part of why, though, I would say is it wasn't that wide. It was a kind of skinny-ish one. It was a college dorm, one 1970s, and it was 6 stories tall. Smaller in South Burlington, with this kind of 20,000 person town in a rural area, and no one really minded it. And that's the one point, but that's just my personal perspective. My other point would be, I suspect there's a good chance that there may be some pushback to such a large change. If we put a higher number on the beginning, when we start out with, we have, you know what I mean? Like, if we do decide to back down a little bit, that makes it a little easier. I think it'll be easier for us to back down later, especially if there is some pushback, versus starting with a lower number. And if we're then forced to back down for that, maybe it goes too low. So I guess I'm sort of thinking this is like a union representative almost here. You start high and you sort of expect, maybe I'm saying quiet part loud too much here, but that's my perspective.
Okay.
The idea of going narrower as you go up is something that we should really take a hard look at. Because a bulky building of 14 or 16 floors is pretty monolithic.
So it is written in that you do, it's minimal in the draft right now, but it is written in that you'd step back by 12 feet after the 4th story. But it would be easy to tweak that number, but to be a larger step back or multiple step backs or
narrow and no
a
step backs.
frontage up higher, well, and then, yeah.
I like multiple step backs or a more strict one at higher stories, put it that way.
I think, so we're happy to do that. I think that there is some level of, the market will take care of this to some extent too. If we look, for example, the City Place building, the first 2 stories are commercial and they are wider. Above that, in residential, and Donna, you can probably speak to this more than I can. If you're doing a double loaded building, there's only so much width you can do anyway, because all your bedrooms need to have windows. You're sort of, you can't create that much interior space. It's not very usable space.
Oh, they
for
had,
the most part.
that was a difficult project, because they had 4 extra layers of parking. And
Right,
so
but
they
just-
had single level corridor with the units all around the outside. They were
But not at the uppers, once you get to the
not at
upper
the,
upper
not at the
stories.
upper level.
Yeah, so I'm saying that there is some level of market.
It was a tough design. I don't know what it looks like now, because I think they changed it quite a bit.
I meant more generally in architecture, tall buildings that are residential are gonna be comparatively. There's only so much depth you can have of a residential building.
Yeah, and they do tend to like to keep them fairly vertical. If there's gonna be some setbacks, they're not gonna be doing that much of it.
We
'Cause
can take a look at
It
that.
gets pretty expensive to build
But-
those decks.
Given the cost of land, starting wide and stepping up isn't the best use of the available land from a developer's point of view. You want to get as much as you can into as little land as you can. So going narrower as you go up, rather than going to setbacks, I think is a better idea.
Or maybe just, I don't know, Donna thinks this, maybe use the word setbacks wrong. I guess I almost think it was what I think we're more concerned about is the long axis. Like if we got if all these buildings have the long side oriented on the street, the setbacks are applying to that axis. That's making the skinny side, that's making this short axis even shorter. I feel what we're concerned about is the long axis that's often not gonna be as affected by the setbacks. I think that's our more concern with the massing, is that you want we're concerned like what the longest axis of the building above a certain height is, which isn't the same as how far step back it is from a street.
Okay,
Yeah.
Kelsey brought it up before, and I think she was the one that brought it up, that you have a podium and you tend to have towers on top of it. Sort of like what they did with City Place.
Mhm.
That's what builders can build.
Yeah.
Without getting into, really very, very special architecture.
Fair.
Because I haven't seen a developer around here that does really special architecture. They kind of want to keep it fairly basic, but you can, you can use nice materials then and things, so there's nothing wrong with that, you get nice materials and balconies, but you end up with some, a little bit more basic structural massing.
How about if we move into street hierarchy?
Okay, so just to sum up what I think we've heard, so that we can make sure we're delivering you back. Something in the realm of what the numbers are here. Equal or minus a couple of stories seems to be something that you're comfortable with. You'd like to look at things that might limit the massing scale of buildings. And you'd like to see some visualizations either through like a SketchUp or through some examples in other communities to test it, or you're comfortable in sharing it more widely. Is that our 3 homework items?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Did I
That sounds
capture
good.
it? And Jessica's maybe not -1 or 2, but maybe -2 to 4 kind of thing.
Just as a matter of interest, is it for buildings of 5 stories and more require an elevator?
Less than that.
It's quite a bit lower than
Less
that.
than that,
Yeah.
anything over 2. Well,
So it's 3 and up.
I think so.
well, it has any multifamily that's more than 2 stories.
Really?
Yeah.
So you can't do a triple deck without an elevator?
Well,
Well, you can, but the upper floors need to be 2 levels, so the main building entry point has
So-
to be on the 2nd level.
Maximum walk up is
First.
2.
Hmm.
Is that right?
I believe that's what Don.
I mean, they can be 3-story buildings, but the entry has to be no higher than the 2nd level. And that's on smaller multifamily. You start getting into large multifamily, and then even a 2-story building needs an elevator if it's a large.
Yep.
multifamily.
All right.
Unless you have that
Street
outside entrance on
hierarchy.
ground level.
Street hierarchy.
That's why townhouses are nice. That's why it's so nice to do townhouses. You definitely don't have to get into elevators as quickly.
Jessica, I will sympathize with you forever.
Everybody thinks I'm slow. We all have lots to say.
50 minutes
Oh,
over.
this,
Can I start out with something?
Sure.
I really liked a lot of the things that Ryan was saying earlier that, I think but I guess I'd like to focus on the part where I think we can have a really good downtown with some through streets going through it. And, I do think that we haven't been maybe talking about it as much in the last little while, but it was a huge part of the conversation as we set up the form-based code in the first place, kind of acknowledging that we do have these kind of thoroughfares that go through the middle of the area where we all would like to spend time and have good places. And I mean, I know we haven't talked about placemaking recently, but it has been a big part of this process, and a lot of the work on the corridor studies and like kind of consolidating entrances and cross streets and improving the walkability. I mean, I think we've talked about it and maybe we're not there yet, but I think it's something that is important to not lose sight of. So I do appreciate that Ryan brought it up. And I think as we have more of these kind of cross streets, whether we call them secondary or the new red streets, new red primary streets, like I think we are seeing really great places coming up. Like some of the ones that he cited are great locations and they are new, built under our form-based code. So, I mean, I think it is something we can be proud of. And I guess I just wanted to also ask, it seems like there's a couple colors on this map that aren't in the legend. Like there's a yellow street and yeah, I guess I just wanted to make sure I knew what that yellow one was at least.
Orange.
Those yellow. Paul.
No, there is a yellow one up near JC Park.
Oh, yeah. Okay, So, let me start with the hierarchy and the idea behind the hierarchy. So this is a little bit of a shift from what the current regulation talks about. It really tries to, this is not about the street itself and how wide the street is or isn't. This is about the role that the street plays in regards to the buildings adjacent to it. So I think that's the key thing. The dashed lines represent streets that do not yet exist. The solid lines are streets that do exist. And then red is primary, magenta is secondary, and the orange is tertiary. The yellow was something I will share on the map with you.
Orange is secondary and magenta is tertiary.
Magenta, oh.
Pink,
oh.
fuchsia.
So those are only dotted. We don't have any
Yes.
tertiaries yet,
Correct.
correct? Okay.
So the yellow, so you gave us some feedback the last time we talked about this in January about there were a bunch of the yellow was sort of driveway cross-lot connections. They were not streets per se, they were sort of how vehicles move through. And we gave a lot of thought to the feedback that you had about, you know, are these in the right location? What are they representing? And we thought that for the most part, that the underlying subdivision standard that requires, sorry, site plan standard and subdivision standard that requires that lots be connected through their driveways was likely sufficient. And that if we're really talking about the role that streets play for pedestrians, then that's what the focus for function, that's what the focus should be. So the yellow is a leftover. I think that when it was going to be a backlot connection, I think it could be potentially a tertiary street if you wanted to be to sort of break up that area.
Wait, are you talking about the one north of Williston Road?
Yeah, north of Williston.
Near Executive Drive, yeah.
Near Executive Drive. And so the function of a tertiary street is to essentially be a curved route. So it's not just has immediate parking like right on it, but parking might come from it. So the U-Mall has sort of its main access road through it today. You'd have the curve today, you'd be planning it out over time, over years and decades. That creates the opportunity to, with the right of way, see pedestrian amenities added to it. The idea that we had in here is that you would be able to add a building onto that street, but only if all of your frontage that is facing onto a primary or secondary street is already met. So you can't just be building the back lot without building in the front. So the idea is to sort of give the ability to make sure that we're creating thoughtful breaks to manage the scale of buildings, to make good transportation, and then to enable over time more and more infill. So that was our thinking, and then the blue in here represent pedestrian, and the thought with that would be that the minimum requirement would be to build a approximately 12-foot recreation path that is a shared use path that is a solid feature. If you then wanted to face buildings on it, you would absolutely be able to do that, but then that transforms that minimum into being something more like what you saw a couple of months ago of a much more substantial pedestrian street. This we thought would enable at a relatively low cost breaks between blocks, but then also opens up for creativity and opportunity for folks. So that is our current draft.
I had one comment. I mean, overall, on the whole, it's I like the direction you guys are going with this. You did mention that there wasn't any, that it mentioned in there that there wasn't any specific form requirements on these streets, correct?
So there's two different things. There's the primary street, secondary street, what we're talking about here, and then there's street types. And the street types are in 11B, and so each physical street would be a street type, like an avenue or a neighborhood street,
Mhm.
like those types that do have those dimensional
Characteristics are
requirements.
defined.
Mhm.
And then it could be either a primary or a secondary street based on this map. So it would be it's two different designations on the same geography.
Mhm.
So the street type would be, if I'm understanding your question correctly, the street type is what would govern, like, it needs
It's
a
the
rec path, and
characteristic
it
of the
needs this,
street.
the sidewalk needs to be 10 feet wide, or the street is going to be 40 feet or 20 feet or whatever.
That's what we only discussed the hierarchies today then?
Yes.
Okay.
And the idea, this is a separation from what we used to have, that this is, or currently have, this is separating. The street type, which is the, you know, right of way to right of way, from its function and role vis-a-vis buildings, and that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
So the idea of a primary is, regardless of both Market Street and Dorset Street could be a primary in terms of their role, in terms of the what has to happen up along them, but obviously as streets, they're very different.
Mhm.
I really spent a lot of time looking at this, and it just occurred to me that tertiary streets they could actually serve kind of a dual function at different times of day, which could do a lot to kind of make a more friendly pedestrian atmosphere. A tertiary, I'm not even sure how they're described in the street types, because I know there's a lot of different types there. But it seems like tertiary streets maybe aren't always through streets. They can be through streets, but they could also be closed during business, during, like, say from 10 till 8 p.m. or something. They could be pedestrian only, and have, because I think we really have to not try to dice this part of town up so much with automobile traffic, because it tends to dominate so much already. And that if putting some limits on it, where, it's like, okay, we acknowledge, there's times of day you need vehicle access here. But I would say, do not put curbs on those streets. That, just design them to be more pedestrian friendly from the very beginning. And that will also help keep the traffic speeds down, because, that certainly is proven in Canada, in Montreal, where they've done this, that everything's become so much more pedestrianized there. And it does slow traffic down. And even, so I kind of looked at this and I thought, oh, okay, looks like it's a tertiary street that would be the extension of, what's it called? Detilio.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Detilio Drive is really just a short access street right now to the school. And, and I don't think you might have a way through there, but it probably wouldn't want to be a traffic through street. Unless the school disappeared for some reason. And that then creates, if you look there, that blue dotted line could go all the way across Williston Road, all the way up to the park. I mean, it could actually become a really nice connection. You could go all the way from one park to the next, on a tertiary street, which during the daytime could be entirely pedestrian. So that would be a bicycle access way to go across Williston Road. I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking out of the box, and we need to do some more to rein in vehicles. And by creating too many curbed streets, I think that we're encouraging too much cars.
I absolutely agree. I was thinking about second Paris for myself. Yeah, I guess the idea is, again, that's why I was asking. I wasn't exactly sure whether this comes in the hierarchy or in the form of it.
Right.
But I mean, something the very minimum I've been thinking about is can we require stuff like these smaller streets require that where they cross pedestrian, like say a sidewalk, that, oh, it has to be a raised sidewalk at the minimum, or as you're saying, maybe go a step further and say these things aren't curved, though that is a, you have to think that through to make sure that vehicles truly feel slow in that situation, because it's not built up.
Oh, yeah.
Having peel mix works, it can work, absolutely, I agree with you, but I guess that's what my initial thoughts was. Like, we also have these like idea of alleys and stuff like that with tertiary streets, like making requirements of the, like, I was thinking like just crossing, like making, like, so if you have the pedestrian sidewalks are always at raised crossings, it makes it feel as though you are impeding into a pedestrian space in the vehicle, versus vice versa. When the pedestrians go down, the street will feels like, oh, the pedestrians are impeding into a vehicle space. But
Yeah.
your idea of making them fully on curb, I'm open to that, but that's definitely a step further.
Even if you have a curb, I mean, like what they do in New Orleans is they have regular streets and sidewalks. People spill over the sidewalks,
Mhm.
it happens every day at the school. When the school's let out too, it's hard to keep the kids on the sidewalk.
No, I think it's
But what they do is they put in these electric
Bollards.
electric bollards, which, if you have access to that street, you can drop those and get your access. And other times it's a barrier to other vehicles. And well, you really respect those.
yeah,
You really respect those because
like
they could do some damage to your car.
No, absolutely.
If they come up when you're not looking. And it's like, uh-oh.
Wait, my only hesitation with the fully like at level ones is as it's being built out, when you have a bunch of vacant lots on the side, is how to restrict vehicle flow without there already being all like pedestrian hardware in place. Like these places we're talking about, that's the goal, absolutely. I'm trying to think about how exactly to enforce that sole vehicle speed when you've got vacant lots on your side or a vacant parking lot in the short term. That's the only, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying that's the only thing. I think that's why you originally curved for that reason, but
Right, and
yeah.
I think that this would be something where a landscape architecture firm who is accustomed to doing urban landscapes like that would have a lot of answers about how do you do that, particularly when you're, changing from one road type to another, because, Detilio, certainly it's gonna, you need to maintain that road access for a certain distance, can't block that off. But from there to Williston Road, beyond on the other side, it certainly could be more limited.
One thing that trips me up whenever I'm looking at this map is to remember that the scale of this also. So, the distance between the orange and the pink. Oh, that's not going to show up. On the north side of Williston Road here that's over 600 feet.
Yeah, it's pretty long.
So part of the medium-term challenge on places like Williston Road is there's really uncontrolled vehicular access in and out on driveways everywhere.
Yeah.
And so creating more, there's going to be a need for cars to be able to get in at some points.
Sure.
So creating, more manageable breaks in that, so that we, so that we're accommodating vehicles but not being dominated by vehicles. So that's part of the thinking here also, is giving opportunities to think about this. Some of this may also shift, as you just put in a grant application to the Regional Planning Commission for studying these intersections. So, whatever you come up with on this one segment may evolve based on the analysis that we're doing about spacing and fixing the Mary Street intersection over time, and what implications that has for access management to the east of there. I did want to note just quickly, I know that we're getting behind on San Remo Drive. There's currently a planned roadway through San Remo Drive right about here on the current official map. The feedback that we've been getting is that is a major impediment to reinvestment in the property, because it's split over two properties. Realistically, unless the two of them happen to be ready at the same time, the only way to achieve it is for one of them to do it, which means that giving up 60 feet, and then the expenditure of building a roadway makes it that the numbers start to really not pencil out. we thought about this, about, what's the purpose behind this, and what did some of Greg Rabideau's work, and we thought the purpose is to really create, smaller blocks. So rather than one street through there, our thinking was 2 or 3 pedestrian connections to link, to break up the mega block of San Remo in a thoughtful way. Yeah, so we just wanted to flag that, and also this is a little bit outside of the form-based code, but one of the sort of related official map things that we've heard feedback on over the years is how could we get Mayfair Park neighborhood eventually better connected into city center. I don't have a magic solution on how to do it right here. I'm going to be honest. That's going to be the hardest part, but getting the idea on paper at least. Of how could we connect the neighborhoods. It's not terribly difficult, other than, of course, working with the diocese. Hayden Parkway gets right up to it, and there's actually unofficially already a path at the end of Davis Parkway that is used 12 months of the year. So at least 2 of those connections are fairly viable if we work with the diocese.
Nice to see that.
One other thing I thought I'd just quickly mention, you'll probably hear more of this in the future. My day job is a traffic designer. One little kind of thing I've been doing a little bit on the weekends, and hopefully have something for too long, is trying to kind of really think a bit more outside the box on how to reimagine Dorset and Wilson roads. And have been working on, I'll be honest, I'm a big fan of roundabouts, and I was working on it, kind of trying to see how would that look, how would that work, how big would they need to be, like how many lanes would you need, that kind of stuff. I'm trying to sort of see. I think I am somewhat optimistic that it could be, I think, a bit more feasible than we might immediately think in the 10, 20, 30 years to really make Dorset and Williston a bit less imposing than they are now. I'm working on that. So it's letting people know, just trying to hopefully I'll plan soon to kind of show people more details, but yeah.
Yep, okay, you guys good?
Good.
Yep. One more agenda item, discussion of draft Article 8.
So this is on the agenda again because it was not provided in your previous packet in a timely manner. That was my mistake. I did provide it the day of the last meeting, and there was some discussion about it, but what I provided in this packet is identical to what was provided day of the previous meeting. I have continued to work on the draft, so anything, grammar, syntax, wording, clarity, a lot of other things. There's some recommendations from our development review staff I've also been incorporating. So at this point, if there's anything, I just wanted to put up an agenda item on that. If there's anything that anyone saw in when they had more time to review the previous version that you wanted to raise, that was of substance, that policy sort of options or discussion, this would be a good time to do that, but also to know that you'll be getting another version of it at a following meeting, probably next meeting.
I did see a couple of grammatical and things, but I decided to ignore. I did have a question on page 19, which talks about balconies that are minimum 4x6, which is 24 square feet, but you've got 28 square feet there.
Yes, intentionally.
But it's contradictory.
It's not contradictory because that is not the width and depth minimums are not necessarily together. So I'm saying you can have 4 feet, but then it has to be 7 feet long. Or you could have 6 feet or whichever the dimensions.
You've got to have 28 square feet minimum.
You have to have 28 square feet, however you'd like to slice it. There's a minimum depth and a minimum width as well.
Probably you should just change the order and say the minimum area is 28 square feet and the minimum depth and width are 4 and 6.
Sure. Happy to.
Jessica?
Yeah, it's actually exactly on the same thing, but it's on the table part, or I mean, maybe it's even in this part, but so table 11B, it's the civic space site amenity on these private / semi-private balconies. I know at the bottom of the table, it does say that only half of the area of the balcony, 50% of the square feet can count towards the amenity requirements.
Yep.
I wanted to make sure that was strong enough. I guess I want to make sure that the entire site amenity civic space is not made up of just balconies and or just indoor space. Like
Correct.
it
So
feels important to me that there's like some portion of this is both common and also outside. So I know on like our stormwater things we have like requirements that I guess on the rain garden one it says that it can't make up more than half of.
yeah, so Jessica, I wrote it differently in the two different places, in the 11B and in the text of Article 8 that talks about balconies.
Okay.
Or about site amenities, and the intention is that up to 50% of your site amenity requirement can be satisfied by balconies. And so then the remaining 50% has to be other site amenity types, which are generally true common space.
Like quadrangles are allowed, for example.
I would say that this is probably something that, I remember the commission talking about this a couple of years ago prior to this. There's a few other things that allow for 50%. So we might want to like just make sure like rain gardens are also 50%. So would it be acceptable to be a rain garden and balconies? That's probably not.
No.
You might have to group all the 50% together and say, in some way.
Because I think well, this is really good because I think the indoor common area, I feel like should get grouped into that too, because I don't think you want to have just indoor common area and balconies or just indoor common area and rain garden. Like I feel like there needs to be some amount of space that's outside and like not the stormwater system.
Maybe the easier way to say it would be to pick the key outdoor ones and say they must be X%.
Yeah. We'll figure out how to make that work in the cleanest way, but for that private space and indoor space and stormwater space should not be the only set amenities that a property has.
Yes. Yeah.
I had I just wrote down some comments on the whole section on qualifying building breaks. I just read down through here and I could think of situations where what we were listing was like maybe really too limiting. As an architect, would look at this. I don't know this, when you print it out, it doesn't get page numbers. It's what's that section?
Oh, yeah, you get the notes.
Facades, section 808.
Qualifying building breaks.
Qualifying building breaks. And I'm just looking at balconies with a depth of at least 8 feet, repeated on each floor vertical plane. And I'm thinking, that's rather limiting and a little bit boring. It's like, why do we have to repeat it on every floor? I think as long as there's a pattern, as long as there's a pattern, because I'm just thinking about the buildings I really enjoy, newer buildings that I've seen that are just really exciting. And they tend to do unexpected things sometimes. It's like buildings from the, 1980s are always very predictable.
Just in the interest of time, because it's 8:59, that is a section that I've been working on pretty significantly.
Can I talk with you about it?
If you'd like to, sure, you can come in, let me know what works.
Yeah, I mean, because I just think that it could be a little bit less limiting.
Yeah, there's been pretty significant wording changes and how that all kind of works together. Like, as you can see here, there's highlights and brackets and question marks and things that when this was sent to at the previous meeting, this was one of the rougher sections for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't think we want to limit creativity by what we're saying.
I just want, and I didn't mean to cut you off. I just was trying to make sure that you understood that this was a work in progress and that we're trying to, as we've said in other instances, trying to make things more flexible, not less.
Yeah.
While still achieving texture and interest.
That's my goal, and and also being aware of what newer buildings are doing.
Great.
Before we go, on page 6, On page 6, there's a streetscape requirement under, and then there's a question mark. Under what? C. Article,
What?
What section are you?
I'm looking at it.
Street, right above corner radii.
you know where that radii
Oh,
is?
the question, are you asking what the question marks are? That's just a reference to the others where streetscape requirements live in the rest of the code.
Ah,
It just, it's a reference to another
It's
section that I
cross-reference.
just, yes, that I just
Okay.
located, that's it.
can we approve the minutes before we go?
Sure.
That's the job.
Mr. Chairman?
No.
No, okay, goodbye.
I.
Make a motion.
you had another-
I'll make a motion to move the,
I said one question on this, shared spaces, open spaces area. I don't know if this is something that we can do in regulations. I guess maybe I missed it, but I wasn't seeing a whole lot, like any language sort of requiring that these outdoor spaces that are normally public, whether the public actually is able to access them comprehensively. Like, I'm a little worried about, like, oh, this place is public, but it's only open, like, from 8 to 9 on Tuesdays or something. Is that something that we can address here, or is that out of the scope of land development regulation, because it's how the space is used after it's created?
So in the rest of the city, it makes more sense because the buildings are less of the lots for the, and things like a large subdivision are developed differently. That site amenities are intended to be common spaces for the people or the users of a building. And then civic spaces are the sort of quasi-public spaces. In the form-based code there, and the way it's written for clarity and removing of hashes for the most part, things are collected into open space as I've written the draft. But there are still two different things that are listed in 11. What I think you're asking about is, can a building just have site amenities that are only open, it's really only accessible to residents or users, versus does it need to have quasi-public, larger quasi-public?
And I worry about the word quasi too.
Yeah, I mean, I only say quasi-public because they wouldn't be publicly owned necessarily.
Yes. But the point is, if you're getting points for it to be quasi-public, but they're like 99% private, like the only public, should that count? Or I feel like that then, yeah, so.
Yeah,
okay.
it depends which type you're sort of trying to be. If you're trying to be a civic space type, it's one thing. If you're trying to be a site amenity type, it's another thing, but we can definitely talk about that.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-on point or question about that? Because there was some addressing of amenities on, well, in the street and the 4 different levels of street types, and there was the pedestrian street or the pedestrian way and pedestrian street. And I was wondering, where did the site amenities kind of come in? There was some discussion about vegetative plantings and things like that, but no discussion of really street furniture. And when you get into those pedestrianized zones, the street furniture becomes really important in those zones, because otherwise it doesn't feel like a pedestrian space unless it's furnished like a pedestrian space.
Right, so that would live it has not been drafted, I don't believe. That would be in Article 11 as the street type of the pedestrian street, as to what is expected of that street.
It has been drafted but not finished.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I can
But that's
look
where
at that.
something like that
Yeah,
would go with the S2.
We get together and take a look at that, because I think those little things are really important to make pedestrian feel.
Yeah, the green outside the Odell apartments on Barrel comes to mind. It's this wide open space without furnishings, and it isn't really used much at all because there's no furnishings in it. It's
Exactly.
like this big thing, yes, there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Green.
Okay, is everybody good to go?
move to approve the planning commission minutes of 26 February 2025.
A second.
I have one comment.
Yep.
I was just called Mr. and it'd
Yes. I saw that.
Be nice to change the R to an S, just a very tiny little thing.
Yeah, I did see it.
Other than that.
All right, with that amendment, take that as a
As
friendly amendment.
corrected.
as amended, yeah. All in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
Hi.
Okay, we don't even need a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All are.
And it's very dense, but it's so exposed. There's one bench.